One way or another, transportation affects all of us, and it's ripe with risk for targeted violence. This is a great conversation about keeping people safe. Let's get started.
From the front lines of violence prevention, digging into the details that matter. Get ready for a 15-minute fast-paced information download that will prepare you to ask the critical question. When disaster strikes, are we good? Now, here's Jim Bennett.
Today we have Joel Lavespere with us. He is an accomplished safety and security consultant whose career includes significant roles as security policy and training manager for the city of Portland, Oregon, and security management with the Oregon Zoo, one of my family's favorite places. With over 14 years in the security industry and prior experience as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Air Force, Joel, thank you for your service. Specializing in anti-terrorism and force protection, Joel brings valuable insights from public sector, cultural institutions, and military security environments. Joel, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Absolutely. Super happy to have you. So, Joel and I met, I guess, a year or so ago when he was doing a presentation on security and transportation. And I got to tell you, you have such an interesting background. I probably would love to hear more stories, but we only have so much time. But feel free to tell a story or two. But
Right.
because both from the military side and also from the private sector side. But he has such an interesting background, and I'm hopeful we'll have you back on again in the not too distant future. But today, let's kind of kick this off with talking about that 360-mile pipeline across North Dakota and Minnesota that you worked on. And everyone's saying, what? He did? So kind of give us a little background on that and tell us about the threat environment for pipelines. I mean, to me, that's
Right.
fascinating.
It's a pipeline, oil pipeline. It was Line 3 or the Line 3 replacement project, which was actually the total project size was 1,000 miles from
Oh,
Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin. I just worked on the 360-mile portion of it
oh,
from the
gotcha.
border of the United States to Superior, Wisconsin. And it's it was considered a replacement project because the original pipeline, the original Line 3, was installed in 1956 or
Oh,
1959 or something along those lines. And it was, aging out. It was actually probably about 10 years past due its age.
oh,
Um, and there were some significant issues that they were like, yeah, we need to replace this pipeline
hmm,
because it does feed a significant amount of oil to the United States, and it does about
interesting.
750,000 barrels of oil a day, which is a lot of oil. And
That's a lot of oil.
yeah, there's actually in that corridor, or the right of way, it's called. There's actually about, I was just there or literally a couple weeks ago. I want to say 6 other pipelines. Um, some of them are ranging from in age from 1951, which was the first pipeline to go through that corridor, to this
Okay.
newest one, Line 3. It's actually Line 93, called Line 93 now. Um, and it moves a ton of oil from Canada to the United States, specifically through that corridor. And
Interesting.
it feeds uh, energy production facilities for a whole lot of different manufacturers.
Wow.
It's also exported, so the United States technically kind of owns the oil, and then they export it out, and then it goes to its various places, but it moves quite a bit of oil.
Wow.
Anyway, so I was working on the project. A buddy of mine from the military actually called me one day and was like, "Hey, dude, we got this project going on. You interested? It's kind of weird. I'll talk to you about it when you get here." And I go, yeah, sure. Because it sounded I'm a if it sounds exciting, I usually get perked up about it. But he goes, "Hey, I need you out here," and I'm like, "Yeah, okay." I was living in California at the time, and it was during
Yeah.
COVID. And he goes, "I need you out here like in 2 weeks. Can you do it?" I'm like, "No." And this was This is probably around May timeframe.
Okay.
And then July comes, and I just so happen to be um, I got laid off from the company I was working with, and I call him up and I was like,
Oh.
"Okay, dude." He's like, "Great, I need you here in a week." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I got you." So I, moved my family up to the Portland, Oregon area,
Okay.
and then I went to Minnesota and North Dakota for a year to work on this pipeline.
Wow.
And when I got there, I was kind of like, okay, I don't really know what's going on, but I have a really strong security background.
Yeah.
And so they're like, hey, we want you to do our security planning and threat assessment and threat vulnerability of this specific part of the project.
Oh.
And I was like, cool. What do I got to look for?
Yeah.
And they're like, protesters. Like,
Oh,
oh,
interesting.
okay.
Okay. Yeah.
it they call them, so it's kind of the PC term is opposition, not
Okay.
necessarily protesters, because it's not a matter of that, protests can be have legal terms.
Right.
So the company called them opposition because they're not
Gotcha.
necessarily breaking the law,
Right.
but
Okay.
they're exercising their First Amendment right in very specific ways. And we
Yeah.
had to protect that, and we had to come up with plans to protect that.
Yeah.
But the threat environment was that the opposition wanted to, one, stop the pipeline from being built,
Okay.
and two, if they couldn't stop it from being built, is to delay it as much as possible
Mm.
so that it is so expensive for the company that was building it that they'd stop it in its tracks. And they were
Right.
trying to
Okay.
get to a certain price point of literally making it not worth the while of the company,
Right.
which that price point is incredibly high, billions of dollars to stop an oil pipeline from being built.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I went out there, did a lot of threat assessments, continuous threat assessments, because it's actually a unique thing where they're building the pipe, or it's kind of like a really, really big plumbing system,
Yeah.
where you've got this 36-inch pipe. They're digging a trench. They got to lay it in the trench. Then they have to bring all the support infrastructure, so pump stations, valve sites, um, other monitoring equipment that they put in through it, and they are building it. And literally, they laid this pipeline, this 360 miles, in 8 months. So it was a fast,
Wow.
very intricate thing, and the people that are building it are very good at it. And the 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 major threat around it and the major opposition around it was that it was going through the headwaters of the Mississippi River.
Oh,
And
interesting. Okay.
that, the Mississippi being the River watershed being as big as it is affects, you know, all the way from the border to border, going down to
Yeah.
the Gulf of Mexico, and goes pretty much to the Appalachian Mountain chain out to the Mississippi or the Missouri River breaks, and it hits so many different things because the Mississippi River is huge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the opposition's big push was, if something were to happen to the pipeline, and this isn't while they're being built because there's no
Mm.
oil in it,
Right. Right.
if something happens down the road, what is that going to do to the water? They call
Yeah.
themselves water protectors.
Okay. Yeah.
So they are very, very, persistent about, hey, if something happens, it's going to get into the Mississippi River watershed, and it's
Yeah.
going to affect the entire nation, which it potentially could.
Right.
Luckily, there's a lot of response mechanisms in place, and
Right.
looking at it through that response mindset. But that was why they were opposing specifically that pipeline. There's another one about to be built that's going to go through what's called the Mackinac Straits in Michigan, which
Okay.
meets uh, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, I want to say.
Okay.
That might be wrong. Check
I
me on
can't
that.
remember it from what was that, elementary, middle
Right.
school?
Right. But
One of the
it's
Great
going
Lakes, right?
it's going through the Great Lakes,
Yeah.
which is a big deal, and they're about to drill a 14-mile pipe underground under the one of the Great Lakes, which is incredibly deep, uh,
Wow.
and are going to run a replacement pipe through that. And
Oh
they're
my
trying to
gosh.
replace it right now, or trying to
Yeah.
get it to the construction phase right now.
Right.
So there's things in the works, and again, looking through
Yeah.
how opposition looks at it is if something were to happen,
Yeah.
that's where
It
the
would affect
worst
the water
place it could
supply.
happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's why they oppose it, rightly so, and they should have that voice to do it. It's just how they implement their plan is why I was working on the pipeline, looking at it through their tactics,
Gotcha.
techniques, and procedures to make sure that if they want to do something nefarious, that they didn't get the chance to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what type of mitigation measures were put in place to protect the pipeline? I'm sure, like you said, there's a tremendous amount of monitoring for
Mm.
once it's up and running, but what kind of mitigation measures for approaching it or damaging it or,
So
yeah,
yeah, so during construction is unique, right?
yeah,
It's because it's a temporary thing,
yeah,
and literally it could be a week. That
yeah,
that pipe that from digging a trench to putting the pipe in the ground to covering the pipe back up could only be about a week. So
right.
there's a limited opportunity to do something to it.
Yeah,
So what we would do is we would look for those key locations that opposition would want to oppose or want to make a
yeah,
spectacle about, would
yeah,
want
yeah,
to do their protests, their large protests. And it
right.
was always around a water body of some kind,
Okay.
a river,
Yeah,
specifically the Mississippi,
right.
or a large river crossing that they could have a public spectacle. So, a
Gotcha.
lot of people could be viewed, could be, brought in, it'd be easy to get to.
Right.
So we would look for those spots, and
Oh,
there's
gotcha. Okay.
quite a few of them.
Yeah.
360 miles through northern Minnesota. There's lakes,
Wow.
streams, rivers all over the place.
Yeah.
And we would identify those spots and we would rank them from, one to whatever it came out to be.
Yeah.
And we would come up with mitigation plans, and it would be mostly considered hasty mitigation plans.
Okay.
So fencing, response forces, some sort of rudimentary monitoring, either through a
Okay.
guard force, camera systems, um, going through MOUs, MOAs with the police departments, local jurisdictions, and we'd also go as far as identify training needs for the local jurisdiction. So if something
Oh,
did happen, the
yeah.
local jurisdiction would have the tools and the training to respond effectively. So
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and it was a fun experience because we actually got to see that in action quite a few times.
Yeah.
Um, because one of the big things that opposition does on pipelines is what's called they call it a sleeping dragon, but it's a blockade where they build these rudimentary cement tubes and they put
Okay.
their arms in them and they literally lock themselves into
Oh,
these tubes,
interesting.
and they create a chain. And it's called the sleeping dragon because it's really hard to move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and they literally lock themselves into these devices, and you have to cut them out literally
Right.
with a saw. And training somebody, a first responder, to delicately cut through a cement piece with rebar and
Yeah.
metal and
Huge risk.
whatever, so it doesn't cut through a person, is incredibly, a delicate process, and you have to have very special tools to do that too, along with other things to do it.
Y-
But yeah,
Yeah,
so
hence the specialized training that was required
yes.
because your typical local law enforcement agency doesn't deal with that certainly very often. I mean, it depends on where you're at,
Right.
but for many of those, especially in rural areas, that's something new, and that's interesting that you provided or arranged for that training for them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it was a fun experience getting to go to a lot of the jurisdictions and have that
yeah,
conversation of, hey, do you understand what's coming?
yeah, right.
And they'd be like, yeah, we kind of do. We're training up on protest mitigation and like protest
Okay.
response. I was like, yeah, that's not what you need to do.
It's a little different in this situation.
Yeah, if they're in a public space, they can't really do much,
Yeah.
especially in the state of Minnesota, because there are laws that protect that a lot more than other places.
Oh, interesting.
And then you can be like, hey, if they get onto a site, we'd go as far as writing a letter on land ownership and say, here's the letter from a landowner, or the landowner would give it to the police department and saying, this is a trespass order. You don't need my permission. You have it already through this letter. Uh,
Gotcha.
that
Yep.
would be a mitigation. And then of course the fencing, we'd actually build fencing systems around these specific areas
Right.
to stop, really to create a barrier to delay the opposition to get to certain equipment. We had there's some very specific equipment in pipeline building
Yeah.
that you don't want touched because it's very
Yeah.
calibrated.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and if it's usually privately owned and it is a person's livelihood, and you really don't want somebody touching
Right.
it because they will literally protect it with their life because it's that expensive, most of this
Right.
stuff. Yeah, so
Exactly. And I can see that too. It's just like you said, highly calibrated. Even a minor, tweaking with it could cause lots of problems. I totally get that.
yeah.
Hey, so I want to move from pipelines to public transportation. But you're going to be back on the show, I hope, because I want
Oh
to
yeah.
have more conversation on pipelines. Super fascinating,
Yeah.
because I know almost nothing about them. And just listening to you from, the presentation I heard before and then today's conversation, there's so much to talk about there. But let's talk about transportation for a minute, and we're getting close to the end. Then we'll jump into the squad room and have a lot more time to talk about. But what unique security challenges did you encounter while working on public transportation infrastructure projects? What were
Yeah.
some of those unique ones?
I will say, depending on, so I worked in three different regions of the country on public transportation infrastructure projects. I worked in Seattle on the building out of the Sound Transit systems. I worked in New York,
Okay,
building out and replacing old infrastructure from the 1800s. And then I worked in San Diego,
interesting.
where there was the ebb and flow of the hazard landscape. I won't call it the threat landscape, but the hazard landscape is incredibly different from region to region.
Yeah.
Um, so Seattle, they're building, it's all brand new. Uh, Public transportation infrastructure, the oldest part of it, I think, is just rearing its 20th year. So I mean, it is new in terms of public transportation,
Yeah.
and they're learning you know, through their trials and tribulations on what is issues with their system because they haven't had the infrastructure breakdown yet.
Right.
They've
Okay.
had a major incident up there back in 2017, but the hazards are very different. And
Hmm.
when I say hazards, you know, Seattle, it's in the Lahar zone for Mount Rainier. It's right
Hmm.
next to Puget Sound. It has, something that I had to deal with when I was up there was the Rivanna area, which had a sinkhole, which was pretty unique situation
Wow.
to boot. And it was during the construction, and they were drilling a 14-mile tunnel from downtown Pioneer District, International District, all the way up to Northgate,
Okay.
Seattle, which kind of did this weave thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Um, it was pretty cool. And then when I went to New York, we were working on probably the oldest public transportation system in the country, not
Wow.
necessarily the world. I mean,
Yeah.
1838 is how old some of this stuff is out there, and getting to see some of the old subway stations. Got to see um, I won't tell you what I saw, but I saw a lot of stuff underground of New York that I was like, okay, this does exist. Um,
Oh, we got to go back and talk
yeah,
about
we'll
that
we'll
next
we'll go
episode.
back.
I'm putting that one on the list for sure.
Um,
Hey, I'm going to actually
yeah,
stop us here for a minute because we're out of time. If this was not the ultimate teaser for what we have coming up in the squad room, thanks for setting that up for me, Joel. That was perfect. We're going to dive deeper into the conversation on transportation. We might
yeah,
jump back for a minute on pipelines, but we're going to be focusing on transportation in the squad room. Hi, everyone. It's Jim. We are very excited about one of the many changes coming to the Are We Good podcast. Specifically, you can now, for a limited time, listen to the entire interview. As you know, that second part of each interview has been reserved for members of the Good Squad. But for now, you can hear the whole interview right here. So, part two is continuing in just a moment. And don't forget to hit subscribe, leave us a like, or drop us a comment. We're continuing to grow and need your participation. Thanks, and here we go with part two. Enjoy. All right. Hey, welcome to the squad room. I'm continuing my conversation with Joel. And if you have not caught the first half of this, please do. It's available here for those of you in the squad room, or you can check it on any of your favorite podcast platforms. But that will give you the background on Joel and a really interesting conversation about pipelines. He and I are going to have another conversation down the road about that because there's so much to learn there, and it's super, super interesting. But right now we're talking about transportation. I want to continue with where Joel had started. So again, be sure you look at the first part of the episode first to make so this will make sense to you. But when we talk about those unique security challenges in public transportation infrastructure, Joel, kind of give us some of those, especially based on your experiences as you kind of outlined them earlier.
Yeah, so different regions have different hazards. Every system. The one saying in public transportation is when you see one public transportation, you've only seen one. So
Hmm.
every public transportation system is different. Every
Yeah.
public transportation system is run differently, and they all have unique challenges. So, like the city of Seattle, one of the big ones was not necessarily trespass, but houseless individuals, riding the system for free. We call them fare evaders.
Yeah.
New York was trespass, where that system has been around since the inception of the city itself, of like the modern city. So, most New Yorkers don't know what it's not to be around the subway system or the trains.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they don't care that they just go onto the track because that's the easiest way to get from point A to point B. And then San Diego was a kind of a unique area because San Diego, they're right in the middle of uh, earthquake area. They're
Yeah.
right on the San Andreas Fault. They're right there, and they're worried about the actual transportation system falling into the ocean. So,
Wow.
it's a unique set of where they're at, and the solutions that they implemented are unique for each place to place. There are a
Yeah.
couple of similarities, one being that it's a public system, so they want the public to come. They want the
Yeah.
public to use the system. So when they put security in place, when they put security technology in place, you know, they don't necessarily mean for people to see it or, make it look institutionalized and say, don't come. So they want to make it welcoming, and they
Yeah.
heavily use crime prevention through environmental design standards
Hmm.
to say, hey, this is a safe place. They wanted to make it feel safe
Yeah.
so that people can feel safe on the platform and feel safe on the transit system. And a good measure, and this was actually a measure in New York, is how many people fell asleep on the train. Seattle and San Diego, they didn't use that
Interesting.
measure because they actually didn't recommend it. But that New York, we were like, yeah, we can measure how safe the train is if you feel comfortable enough to fall asleep.
Wow.
Um, I will say this though, in the subway system, because in New York, it's actually broken down into 5 different systems. It's
Okay.
broken down into Metro North Railroad, Long Island Railroad, the subways, buses, and then bridges and tunnels. The railroads are run differently from the subway, which the subway was New York City subway, and
Okay.
then the railroads are Metro North and Long Island. Metro North went up to Poughkeepsie, New York, and actually went out to New Haven, Connecticut, and Long Island went all the way up to Nassau County on Long Island Sound. So,
Oh, okay.
two totally different systems, but the railroads measured that if you could fall asleep on the train. The subway did not. The subway, you don't fall asleep on the subway. But anyway, it's just
Yeah.
regionally unique for the threats, but there are similarities in the systems where, of course, they're going to have uh, video surveillance. They're going to have some sort of way to make sure that people are checking that or paying their fare through a fare
Right.
check system.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Seattle and San Diego, it was called a fare paid zone. So you have a card, you tap it onto a system that says you're good. In New York, they actually use conductors on the trains, and on the subway, they had the
Oh,
turnstiles where you put the ticket in, and
right.
that's where you're going into a fare paid zone. Um, so there's similarities, but it's how they look for those things or how they actually codify those things is
Yeah.
different from system to system.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about kind of that transportation infrastructure, it often represents both a daily necessity for the public, but also a potential high value target for those intending to cause harm. how do you kind of balance that accessibility with robust security measures?
Right. So, it's that idea again, utilizing crime prevention through environmental design or techniques heavily into those public spaces,
Okay.
right? And that's the idea is we want to make it feel safe. We want to make it feel open, airy, bright. We want to make it so that people can be seen from end to end of the platform on both
Yeah.
sides
Yeah.
of a platform, and that if worst comes to worst, there's a way for people to communicate to the proper people to generate a response, either police, fire, whatever, or customer
Right.
service, or some sort of janitorial service, because that actually happens a lot.
Right.
So there's a way, we wanted to be able to make ways for
Yeah.
people to feel safe, to be able to communicate to the proper people, to make sure they got the needs that or the response needed for that situation. And then, of course, there's some target hardening depending on where you're at. Again, going through CPTED standards being the primary, but you could see natural barriers of some kind in the system so that you don't see those high value targets, or eliminating those high value those threat actors to use certain tactics for high value targets.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
it would customize around the stations themselves because that's the public access area.
Right. Okay.
But go outside of the stations, you're going to have different systems that you have to actually harden to. So, like in Seattle, they had a traction power substation. So the power stations that actually generated the power to propel the train,
Yeah.
those had to be those are different, and they had to be protected differently. And those you probably didn't, if you're ever up in Seattle, you don't know what those are because they blend into the environment so well
Okay.
that you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't know if you looked at it. Uh,
Interesting.
Signal boxes, those are really, those are still heavily used. Those are those metal containers when you go over a track and you see the drop arms,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
boxes,
Yeah.
those are protected in a certain way. I
Yeah.
won't go into that because most of them, there is a
Sure.
standard for that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
those are actually usually heavily vandalized because they're flat and there's the same thing everywhere.
Yeah.
And those are incredibly important for the signal for the drop arms. But
Yeah.
that actually doesn't necessitate the actual signal system from or working, because there could be something else down the road that is actually making sure that that signal is working for that train. So there
Oh,
are
okay.
different techniques. I won't go into all of them, but
Yeah.
there are different techniques depending on the type of system that generates with the train or generates with the actual transit system in a
Gotcha.
than a whole, and how those are protected are different. But the big one is SEPTED for the
Yeah.
public spaces.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, how have we seen things change just in
Hmm.
your career? Especially when we kind of start mixing into this, the convergence of physical and cyber
Hmm.
threats. I mean, that's obviously changed every dynamic of the security industry. But what have you seen as kind of the changes or the evolutions over the last few years?
So a lot of trains, a lot of transit systems are using some sort of SCADA to monitor their transit system. So
Okay.
cyber is so prevalent, or the convergence of cyber is so prevalent that that is a worst case scenario. And usually when you see a cyber threat, it, it's usually a ransomware threat for the public agencies, because there's
Okay.
not a lot
Yeah.
of they're not actually trying to stop the system, because there's a lot of checks and balances in place, and there's a lot of overrides because there's still a lot of mechanical um, analog systems out there.
Right. Right.
There's a lot of antiquated trains out there, is the best way to put it. But there's newer systems coming online like ATC, automatic train control, that is a SCADA system
Okay.
that actually will slow down the train if the system feels that it's either going too fast or it's coming into an area that it needs to go slower.
Okay.
So there's, most people see trains as a straight thing, but actually there's a lot of turns in the train, or a
Yeah.
lot of turns in the track system.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go at 80 miles an hour through that turn. So you want to slow it down to about 55, or even slower than that. So they have what's called automatic train control, and that's a newer system that they're adding to modern trains, and it's actually mandated by law to have it, and each system is going to be different, but it is a SCADA centric system.
Gotcha.
How
Okay.
that's going to be protected, I don't necessarily know, but I will say that the introduction of ATC into the public transit system is going to be at most executives' top of mind in how to protect it. Um, through
Gotcha.
whatever
Okay.
cyber it is. And with AI generating or AI changing cyber landscaping and security technologies, I truthfully think the security of public transit is going to get better and better
Hmm.
because of how we're implementing, security systems into public spaces, where we're actually going to be able to identify uh, nefarious actors faster,
Right.
and we're going to get those alerts a lot quicker. So I think it's
Gotcha.
actually going in a good direction,
Yeah.
not necessarily, where it was when I started, where you got a lot of guys that, or a lot of folks in transit that have been doing it for 40 years, and then they've always done it the same way, and now they're getting
Right.
on board and be like, oh, there's this new stuff and it does this, it makes my life easier.
Right.
Yeah, let's go with it.
Yeah. It's all about protecting people for sure,
Hmm.
because like you said, depending on the nefarious acts of someone, that they can absolutely be putting lives at risk. So that is so critical. Let's bounce over for a moment just to your military background. I alluded to that a little bit in my introduction of you and your time in force protection. What have you kind of pulled from that you found most valuable when securing, civilian transportation infrastructures?
Yeah. So I had a, I'm not going to say unique. I had a unique experience in the military and what I did in the military, in anti-terrorism force protection. Uh, my job was to move nuclear weapons for the Air Force.
Wow.
So, it was a very high criticality
Yeah.
operation. It's considered the most critical peacetime mission in the Department of Defense of moving an asset.
Yeah.
So just the just the idea of that alone, kind of puts you in a different mindset on how you're trained to look at things. And
Yeah.
it was always a perfection is the standard.
Right.
And you know you're moving the thing that will hurt
Yeah.
a lot of people if it's stolen.
Yeah.
So that was the mindset going out the door with one of these suckers.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I pulled from it was actually quite a lot, because I was in charge at the age of 22, a big thing that goes boom, and
Yeah.
it wasn't for a short distance. It wasn't, you know, wasn't to the grocery store and back. This was far. This was a
Yeah.
very significant distance,
Yeah.
and it's very vulnerable in these distances.
Yeah.
So what I learned from it and the security aspect
Yeah.
was how to really evaluate risk around an asset, and
Yeah.
how to really, how to convey it to leadership of, this is the risk, this is why we're doing this or doing that,
Yeah.
and how how to articulate to some very important people that, hey, this is a very risky operation and you have to trust me to do it,
Yeah.
day in and day out. And if you don't, you find the next best person, and they will do that in the Air Force. um, but it's really learning. I learned how to articulate the risks and understand what that actually meant at that age, because
Yeah.
that's a very young age to be in charge of something that big.
Oh
And
yeah.
most other countries that have nuclear weapons, it's usually a general, and I was a second lieutenant doing it. uh
Yeah, I think we
so
have this
just imagine
mental
that,
picture of,
right?
this person with lots of stars and whatnot,
Yeah,
who stand there in charge and has been in the service for 30 plus years, with their foot up on the bumper, kind of going, this is what we're
yeah,
going to do. And
yeah, exactly. And I'm a
yeah.
I'm a butter bar, and I've been in the service for 2 years. And a colonel, uh, going, "Hey, you're in charge," and I go, "Cool." And just understand, if something happens,
It's you.
it's you. And I go,
Oh my
"Roger that,
gosh.
sir." So, but anyway, it's understanding and learning what that actually meant
Yeah.
and then applying it. And, how do I transfer that to the civilian world
Yeah.
is how do you articulate risks to senior leaders without making it sound like the world is going to end?
Good
And how
point.
do you
Yeah.
articulate it from, the highest priority to the lowest priority and why those priorities are important and how that happens?
Yeah.
So, that's been incredibly important in my line of work of especially around transportation and the building of infrastructure in the United States
Yeah.
is how do you articulate the risk effectively, because you could be talking to some very, very important people and they don't have a whole lot of time, so you got to give it to them in an elevator
Yeah.
pitch
That's
versus
right.
you know the front ends, wrench turner troop who can take, they're required to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
But, how do you do that? And that's really something that I learned from the military. The other thing that I learned from the military, which actually was is I think one of the most important life lessons I've ever had,
Yeah.
is I'm not going to know everything on
Yeah.
certain subjects.
Sure. None of us do.
And there are going to be people in your life that have more, but don't have the same authority. So
Good
relying
point.
on those people is incredibly important. So again, going back to I'm a 22-year-old second lieutenant moving a nuclear asset
Yeah.
100 miles at a time. I've got a 20-year senior NCO, non-commissioned officer, right at my, on my left side
Yeah.
who has more experience doing it, and then he has no authority, or that person has no authority to say do this. I'm the
Right.
one that's holding the bag, and you go, hey, Sergeant Harris, what do I do, and how do I not look stupid? Um, and that was an incredibly important lesson, because there are going to be people in everything you do that have more experience than you, and relying and actually looking for those people, not just as a mentor, but as a person that you can lean on and say, hey,
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing in this aspect or this aspect. How do I make it so I can do it this way? And I had some really, really, really strong senior NCOs
Yeah.
that helped me out. And I've got a top five, and that will be held to me, because I can tell you that there's certain people that think they're on it and they're not. But anyway, it's
Yeah, that's
it's
huge.
learning that is
Yeah.
that there are people out there that are going to help you, and then how do you motivate people up, down, and across is incredibly important, and that's something that I learned from the military, and that will put into anything I do. So a lot of leadership and a lot of life
Yeah.
lessons from the military.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and that's an incredible leadership lesson, and understand that. And I translate that exactly into the discussion of violence prevention. As we're talking about transportation systems, pipelines, whatever, there are going to be those that are decision makers that don't necessarily know all the details, that rely on those that are not decision makers. And I think
Hmm.
that's a lesson that, from the show's perspective here, I want people to hear that and think about that. Is you may have the stars on your epaulets or whatever it might be, but that doesn't mean that you are the expert in it. So be sure that you are asking those questions, listening to your team for sure. I want to ask you for just a moment here, kind of about that complex coordination required between jurisdictions. So let's kind of, I guess, bounce from military back to public transportation.
Okay.
You're dealing with a lot of different jurisdictions, or you can make it the
Hmm.
pipeline, wherever you want. But there has to be coordination between different organizations, different jurisdictions, and a variety of different stakeholders when securing, well, I guess, those transportation projects. How do you accomplish that? I mean, how do you get everyone on the same page from a safety standpoint, or protecting people, or protecting the asset?
I will say that the best way to do it is first responders are always hungry. So free lunches, and you have multiple free lunches, is one of the best
Yeah,
ways to do it.
yeah,
And the other part is, especially when you're building infrastructure, is something that first responders that I found is that they're always hungry. Of course, they're always hungry for food and free coffee, but they're
yeah,
always hungry for knowledge. They're always
yeah,
trying to learn. So giving them the opportunities to come learn a system, come learn, how to do a certain operation. So in public transportation, especially if you have certain aspects, learning to shunt a track is incredibly important for a firefighter, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you got potentially 1500 volts of direct current, and understanding that if you get too close to that, so it's called an overhead catenary system. If you get too close to that, you could create an arc flash, and that electricity is going through the path of least resistance to a
Yep.
grounding point, which is usually the track.
Right.
So understanding how to shunt a track and how to deadline an overhead catenary system is incredibly important. And giving those first responders those training opportunities to do that is incredibly important. And finding those, and then providing those outlets and those ways of creating those relationships before you need them is incredibly important. So it's always that, hey, we want to do this with you. How do you do it?
Yeah.
How would you go about doing this? Let me buy you lunch. Let us set up a lunch and learn for you, and then let us set up training for you. Let us set up those opportunities for
Right.
you, so that when you do respond, you're going to do it in a safe manner. You're going to do it so you can respond effectively
Yeah.
and do it as fast as you can, because in transit, it's actually, the name of the game is how fast can you get the train back on the track.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
so, providing those opportunities, and again, it goes back to the free lunch, free food.
Yeah.
That's when you get firefighters come in droves when you say, "Hey, I am providing this free luncheon this day, and this day,"
Yeah.
and you get to whichever one you want to come to. If you want to come to all three, that's even better.
Yeah.
But providing those, and it
Those are
really,
great.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean
it,
that's huge because like you were saying, I mean it's those little tips that we want people to hear and be aware of how do I kind of bring everyone to the table and offering certainly the food side of it is huge. But the other side of it of we want to provide you information. And so especially first responders are hot on that. But other organizations too of like, hey, we want to be dialed in. No one
mhm,
wants to have to be a partner, a supporter, a stakeholder that's in the dark and like, well, I don't even understand what we're doing to protect people, but yeah, they want that information. So
right,
I think that's huge. So let's talk about people in general, though, because everyone to a degree plays a role in preventing threats and targeted attacks, et cetera, all the way up to criminal attacks, if only by just being an observer or a reporter.
hmm
What messaging to transportation system users is most valuable, either the mode or the message, or tackle both? But how do we enlist their help? Because there's way more of them
right,
than there is of us.
right. Okay. Just because I worked for the organization that originally owned it, and I think somebody, when they hear this podcast, if and when they hear this podcast, they would kill me if I don't say it. Um, the See Something, Say Something program has been incredibly effective in public transportation, and
Yeah,
how that messaging has gone around and caught on as wildfire after 9/11. It was just a marvel on how it was implemented. So it was implemented in the MTA in the city of New York first, right?
okay.
Because that's where the majority of people in New York see that type of messaging, right? Because
Yeah,
that's the lifeline of New York City. 8.6 million people a day use those transportation systems. So how they did it, they put it everywhere. It was, it's on steps, it's on billboards, it's on, the loudspeaker systems. It's there's reader boards that say it all over New York, and it's still there and it's still effective. So
yeah,
they that alone has been an incredibly useful security awareness of how to teach somebody in the quickest manner of how to observe and report something that's out of place,
yeah,
right?
right.
I mean, there's so many use cases for the See Something, Say Something program in New York alone of how they have thwarted
Yeah,
terrorist attacks, right?
absolutely. Yep,
The Times Square bomber with the Nissan,
yeah,
there was a hot dog vendor that saw it and reported
mhm,
it to a police officer.
that's
And
right.
that's what kind of got the response going. So, it's those easy messages like See Something, Say Something that is incredibly important in the public transit. So I actually adopted the See Something, Say Something program in the pipeline,
Okay.
and became somebody made me a t-shirt that said the see something say something guy, and every time I'm on a project it's like, oh yeah, so we had these morning meetings every morning
Yeah.
with the project management team and the construction management team, and there's probably about 400 people on this meeting, and everybody has their little spot, and it comes down to, to me every morning of I do it like a daily threat brief of like
Yeah.
incidents that have happened, like what to do if if you encounter this type of issue or
Yeah.
scenario. And then at the end of it, I set it every day for a year. If you see something, say something, and remember to call immediately. Do
Yeah.
not wait.
Yeah.
And it got across the project like wildfire, that where people would say, like, if I didn't say it, somebody would say it for me.
Say it for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's that easy messaging, and
Yeah.
it's so effective. And the see something, say something program has been so effective. You see it in airports, you see it in almost every single public
Yeah.
transportation uh, system in the country, and it's just so effective of what to do
Yeah.
if you see something out of place. So
Absolutely. And I think you cover that so well because it is something that's been so effective. I mean, there's just so many examples of someone that did say something after they saw it. Not that that didn't happen before we came up with that wonderful phrase, but it's something that you can ask a third grader right now, and
mhm.
they'll probably be able to say, see something, say something, because it does make a difference. Now, is there any particular kind of training approach for those that are employees? Because we're telling the public, hey, see something, say something. They don't have to
Mhm.
know a lot. It's obviously the more they can understand what threats look like, the
Right.
value increases. But let's talk about employees. What do we like? How do we educate them? Because they're even more important because they're dialed into the actual mechanics of the operation, whether it's operating a bus, a train, or whatever.
Right. So there's actually change in law recently. Oh, actually, I say recently, it was 2020. Recently for me is 5 years, I guess. But anyway, there is recent change in law in the public transportation sector that uh, organizations had to identify security sensitive employees, and you'd have to have a
Okay.
training program for those security sensitive employees, operators being one of them. So operators are the ones that actually operate the trains and the buses.
Yeah.
Uh, and then safety sensitive, there's security sensitive and safety sensitive, and they're usually the same. But operators, maintainers,
Okay.
conductors, security staff, public safety staff, uh, multitude of staff. There were 17 actually identified, and you have to have a specific training set for those frontline employees, and they're usually
Gotcha.
frontline. So, and there was not a specific criteria in the training program, but
Right.
there's, high level things that you had to train on and
Yeah.
how to identify. And then it got into a little bit more, you had to break it down from your executive level to your management level to your frontline
Okay.
level to, to other maintainers, system maintainers, and then tertiary people, uh, finance, HR,
Yeah.
of how to train them and what training criteria you have to have for them too. So it differed on the level within the organization,
Yeah.
but it also got to in law under part 1500, 49 part 1500, there's very specific things that have to be trained. So,
Yeah.
active assailant, active shooter has to be
Yeah.
trained in a transit system now.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
if a train derails, right, you have to have a response mechanism and a training in place so that people on the train, employees on the train, are effective in actually evacuating that train safely and
Mm-hmm.
where those points are to help people evacuate effectively. So there
Interesting.
are different levels in the
Yeah.
transit system, and it depends. But in my experience, there's actually quite a few videos specifically around transit, and there's actually training programs out there for those transit security, transit agents
Okay.
to effectively respond to security incidences. And actually, there's also some pretty good standards out there through APTA, American Public Transit Association, of how to build a training program. So there are standards too. So it's
Gotcha.
kind of a multi-level
Yeah.
approach to how to effectively train somebody. in the
Absolutely.
transit system, and who gets trained on certain aspects and what level. So, you know, do you need to know how to defuse a bomb? No, but you could have a bomb technician show you like, hey, the hot method of how you actually identify a suspicious package.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they go into that level of detail,
Yeah.
uh, but it depends on the employee too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, staying in your lane of pipeline and transportation, tell
Hmm.
me what you see as the most significant vulnerabilities in our nation's infrastructure. Again, let's stick just to those two areas, one or
Okay.
both. You pick.
Okay. So there's a common theme for both of them, in my
Yeah,
opinion, where there's a lot of infrastructure out there that's aging, that is
yeah.
old, that was built in, the 1950s. Some rail infrastructure is from pre-Civil War
Wow.
that's still being
Yep.
used. Depending on where it is in the country and
It's
what type
amazing.
of infrastructure it is.
Yeah,
So there's a significant problem with aging infrastructure, and that it needs to be either removed or replaced.
yeah,
So to me, that's an incredible vulnerability in the system. One that potentially, depending on where it's at, could be capitalized on
yeah,
as a vulnerability
yeah.
if they know about it. But
Right,
the other part is the convergence of AI and those systems that transit agencies are bringing on that don't necessarily know where those vulnerabilities are yet because it's so new. And the introduction of AI technologies of, do we trust it?
right.
And do we trust an AI to run a train or run our, our signaling system? Um, and there could be a vulnerability there. We just don't know yet. So it's a kind of a crazy dichotomy of we've got some old stuff, but we're putting new technology in place to run the
Hmm.
old stuff. So, and it's just a gamut of in between. So depending on where you're at, pipeline, it's environmentally sensitive.
Hmm.
So there's going to be a continued opposition, anti-pipeline opposition throughout the world, as
Right.
we see, as long as we're still using oil
Hmm.
as a energy source.
Yeah.
And that goes for transit too, because there's oil trains, right?
Right. Right.
So, but for public transportation, you know, it's we're trying to build it, and depending on the political climate, we could be building. It could take a lot longer to build new transportation infrastructure throughout the nation, or
Right.
replace it if it needs to be replaced, because you know engines break down, track breaks down. You got to maintain that stuff. You got to maintain the signals. You got to maintain you got to understand that things break down, so you got to fix it, you got to replace it, and that is, I think, one of the biggest issues right now is keeping up with the replacement of it, because
Yeah.
it's fast.
Yeah. And it's easy to exploit
Hmm.
potentially because it doesn't come with the security measures that
Hmm.
today's modern infrastructure does. Versus something like you said, going all the way back to I think you said pre-Civil War on some
Pre-Civil
stuff.
War.
That's amazing. I mean,
I've
and I'm a
Yeah,
history guy. I would like to have another conversation just about that because I'm just kind of curious what those are.
I'll
But
give you a little snippet. All
yeah,
right,
go for
so
it.
okay, so the
Yeah.
track in the system, it's measured in weight, and the
Okay.
weight is measured off of a 3-foot section called a.
Okay.
And then in that 3-foot section, you're going to have a stamp. It's called a berthing mark. So when they build the actual rail, when
Yeah.
they're actually putting it through the dies and things to make the
Yeah.
rail, they put a berthing mark of where it was made, the month it was made, and the year it was made. And when
Okay.
I was in New York, I found an 1881 piece of track in the system, and I was just like, we got to cut this. And I was looking at my partner at the time, and I was like, we got to cut this out somehow. We got to figure out what to do with this, because it's literally it's a
Yeah.
yard long, and you're just like, man, I gotta somebody's gonna want to see this.
Yeah. Oh
So
my
yeah, there's some
gosh.
pre-Civil War
Wow.
stuff out there, and the old track systems used to have these turntables, and instead of pulling out all that stuff, they just
Yeah.
filled it in with concrete, and a lot of those old turntables are still there in some pretty significant parts. And we actually, when I was in New York, we actually dug one up on a
Yeah.
project. It was pretty cool. We're like, whoa,
Wow.
it's still there.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Well, Joel, this has been incredible. I had a great time with you. I want you back because there is so much more to talk about in both the pipeline world and transportation. And for our guests, I hope you really enjoy this because this is a great, really meaty conversation. Don't forget, Bolante.net is your supporter for whatever you need to best protect your team, train your team, conduct tabletop exercises. That's what we do. So check us out, Bolante.net, as always. Joel, thank you for being here. I've so much appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely. And so, everyone, don't forget what's most important before disaster strikes to ask that question. Are we good?